Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and to all the massive audience. Welcome to today's meeting of the Public Works Committee. We have a fairly abbreviated agenda today, so we will get right to it. As always, we take the consent agenda first, except for any items that members wish to pull. Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull C1 from the agenda, and if there's nothing further, I'd make a motion to approve the balance.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the balance. Mr. McIntyre?
Can I pull C2 for just a brief comment?
Sure. So the motion now is on C3.
Correct.
Those in favor, please indicate by saying, are we going to have the screen voting come up here? All right. Please vote accordingly. It's approved. Now we will go to C1, and Mr. Taylor, would you explain what you pulled that for?
Yeah, just a brief explanation. I have not had the opportunity to meet with the developers of this particular development. It looks like that the Grove Official Road will be sort of bringing in over 100 houses, well over 100 houses into the southeastern portion of the city, and we share that area with the south portion of the city. Just want to make sure we can hear from the developer and try to answer or address any concerns that some of the community might have, and I just hadn't had the opportunity to do that to this point.
I understand that staff is not throwing out any red flags about holding it in committee for a couple months.
Good evening, Chairman Bessie. We don't have any concerns about holding it in committee.
All right. In that case, without objection.
Has this gone through planning board?
It's not in the city.
Right now it's in the county, and
It's not a rezoning, it's a petition annexation. No, it's a petition annexation. They want to become part of the city.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So without objection, we'll hold that in committee until the August meeting. Item C2, please. Mr. McIntosh, you had a question.
Just a point. I know that the Recreation and Parks Commission is going to be bringing something to us and probably to your committee here to talk about elevating the pedestrian bike item in our stack of priorities. And I know I think it's number 9 now. So anyway, I've just heard from a member of the group that they're going to be bringing something to us, so we'll maybe at our next meeting be able to talk about that. But I don't really think I don't think there's an opportunity for us to change the order of those strategic priorities, are there, City Manager?
I mean, that was the way the council voted. I think Mr. Tesh can answer, but if it's in the top 16, there really isn't a pecking order among those 16. They're all the priorities that you chose.
That's my understanding as well, basically.
Okay.
But
I thought we had ranked them.
We did. We did.
There were more than 16, but the 16 made.
Okay, well, this was number 9.
So all of the top 16 are priorities that are reflected in the strategic plan. The ranking of specific items would only be used potentially to look at future budget allocations by the management team in terms of what the city manager might put in future operating or capital budgets for recommendations. I would say that, yes, those were ranked by the entire city council at that meeting, and so the opportunity to change them would need to be done by the entire city council if you were to look at it.
Got it. Yeah. But if the committee saw fit to make that, to request that change of the entire council, that could be done.
Something that I would recommend that you look at as we are looking at the adoption of the plan this month. But again, any items, if you want specific action items to be added to the plan, I'd be more than happy to entertain those and work with staff on specific action items to add directly into the plan.
That's good.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Ms. McIntosh, is there something in particular that you...
No, I haven't seen what they're requesting. I just know that there's going to be a request to essentially elevate its position on our list of priorities. A bit of scale. So.
Okay. My understanding is, and anyone who knows differently or knows that I'm missing some nuance, please correct me, but if it's on the list of priorities, we're planning to be working on it, and things that for whatever reason are ready to go faster don't have to wait until the one on the list before them is done before we move on it. Are you talking about the folks that have a resolution they want us to consider?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I don't think that would be bound by it, but we'll see.
Okay, great. Thanks. It was a short meeting, so I figured it was okay to ask that question.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if I had thought about how short the meeting was likely to be, I might have said, well, go ahead and bring it forward and we can review it at least.
It's something I think we will be in support of.
Yeah, but it just, I didn't want I know that our colleagues don't tend to react well to surprises, so I'd like to avoid that when possible.
What do you mean?
Really?
Well, give him that idea.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, I've made a motion to approve this item, but I just wanted to state for the record that though I am interested in all 16 of these, I am particularly interested in just our local justice reforms and what that means for the local people in our community, whether that's license restoration programs or expungement programs, whatever it takes, because it all ties into anti-poverty initiatives. And then also importantly, I think workforce development training should be at the top of our list of things to think about. All of these things are on our list, so I wholeheartedly and it's with pleasure I get to move for this approval of this item.
Very good. It has been moved and seconded by Ms. Scipio. If there is no discussion, those in favor, please vote yes. Opposed, vote no. And that is passed. Thank you. That completes the consent agenda, which carries us to the general agenda item.
G1, consideration of items related to the pilot program for transit-oriented development planning.
And presenting will be.
Good evening, Chairman Bessie, members of the committee.
Good evening.
It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Byron Brown. He's a principal transportation planner in your Department of Transportation. He's been personally involved in this endeavor, and he will do a much better job than my failed attempt last evening to describe this to you. And he will also be preparing the requested documentation, which you should have by tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, welcome.
Welcome, members of the City Council, Public Works Committee. Try to be brief and give you some details on the TOD grant. In 2014, the City of Winston-Salem adopted the Urban Circulator Study, which was the city's first look at streetcar implementation in the urban core. This study concluded with the modern streetcar being the locally preferred transportation alternative sought by the citizens of the community. This study proposed the east-west route, potentially connecting Winston-Salem State to Wake Forest Medical Center. In spring of 2018, FTA announced the pilot program for the Transit-Oriented Development Comprehensive Planning Funds for land use, zoning, and housing planning to encourage and facilitate TOD development along the proposed north-south corridor. This corridor was also being studied by the Wake Forest Innovation Quarters to determine the cost and feasibility of using abandoned rail lines donated by NCDOT's Rail Division for potential streetcar connecting Winston-Salem State to Wake Forest University's campus. The results of the study, as it was stated, is that the cost and the efforts needed to reconstruct and retrofit the corridor would be cost prohibitive in the short term. The city was informed that it was a recipient of up to $1 million in FTA award funds for the TOD grant, and thus taking into consideration the study results, the city was allowed to revise the scope and include and remove some elements. The final revisions were approved, and the study again will focus on the best strategies for implementing TOD supported planning along the proposed corridor. We've also included deliverables such as affordable housing, mixed income housing strategies, neighborhood impact strategies and analysis, business development and retention, multimodal alternatives for complementary features along the corridor such as greenways and bike trails, zoning, funding, and marketing strategies and recommendations in the study. This is an 80-20 funding effort, so we've requested $800,000 from FTA, which will require $200,000 from the city to be the matching funds. At the Finance Committee meeting last night, it was mentioned by Councilmember Adams that there should be emphasis placed on getting and keeping the right persons involved throughout the process, especially those whose communities could be impacted by this planning effort. As part of the procurement process, the Department of Transportation will request a robust public participation process that focuses on getting input from these specific groups and maintain them throughout the process. Also, some additional details requested about stakeholders involved in the initial urban circulator study conducted in 2014. Parties included Guller CDC, Wake Forest University, Winston-Salem State University, NCDOT, the Chamber of Commerce, West End Neighborhood, Biotech Place, Reynolds, Downtown Winston-Salem Partnership, Park, Duke Energy, the Career Center, Creative Corridors, the School of Arts, the Housing Authority, amongst other groups and private citizens. And at this time, I'll be more than happy to take any questions that you might have about the grant.
Questions? Yes.
So is streetcar, trolley, light rail still in the mix of the study?
It is still in the mix. So what the intent of the study is,
But the route was considered to be, I mean, the reason that we're now reorienting the scope of this.
well, part of it has to do with the route and the cost that it would take to retrofit and upgrade the roads, particularly along the abandoned railroad corridor here in Winston-Salem downtown area.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Scipio.
I know that with that light rail project, a lot of work went into letting the neighbors in the neighborhoods that were going to be affected, alerting them that you need to come out to this town meeting to talk about that. And particularly, I was living with my brother on 27th Street when that happened, and I know the residents have an expectation that this is coming. If it is not coming, I think we need to let them know that it is not coming.
Understood.
And so somehow we need to because a lot of effort, they had people going door to door, telling them to come to the meetings, and so people got a little excited about it. So I think it would be great if we could get back to the neighbors and let them know that it was cost prohibitive and that will not be happening, but you really need them, if they're still engaged in this study,
Yes,
to offer that to them.
will do.
Thank you. Mr. Larkin.
So, as I understand it, we were authorized a $1 million grant, federal grant, which we would have to add 20% to, which would then...
Initially, when we first applied for the grant, we applied for $2 million. After FTA's review, they came back to us and said that we could get up to $1 million from FTA. If we did the whole $1 million, then that would require a 20% match, which would be
If we did what? I'm sorry.
120. I'm sorry.
If we did what?
If we took the whole $1 million from FTA, but we decreased that amount to $800,000, which will require us to provide $200 in matching.
So more than 20%.
That would be
200,000 is more than 20% of 800,000.
I'm sorry. Say it one more time.
$1 million.
We're not taking the $1 million. We're
It's
taking
80-20 of the whole amount.
80. Okay, it's 80-20. All right.
Right.
Thank you. That clarifies.
I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Okay. So, and all of this money that we're both getting and putting in the pot is for studying only. There's no bricks and mortar. There's no acquisition. There's nothing. So we will be hiring a consultant to
Yes.
come in. We will be sending out an RFP or request for proposals or something
Yes.
based on. And this is to look at you said the trolley car game is still in play.
I'm sorry.
The trolley car options are still being looked at.
This is not to look at the use of a streetcar. This is to look at the land uses associated with the streetcar.
Okay,
corridor.
so trolley cars or streetcars are no longer being considered by
No,
the city of
that
Winston-Salem in
was
this
part of
program.
it. Well, I won't say is it being considered, but that was the focus of the 2014.
Right, I understand that. So the things have changed since we originally started putting in the money. I heard yesterday about a study that was being done by the Innovation Corridor people that began to address some of these same issues. You familiar? Do we have access to that? Or?
That's this initial feasibility study that came back and said that at this point it was cost prohibitive. So we'd already received this authorization. We've worked with the feds to retool it so that we can use it for basically transportation-oriented planning around the corridor. One of the things that the Innovation Corridor came back and suggested was, that we need to plan and try to, this money can't be used for this, but try to actually acquire the right-of-way. Initially, maybe the next 10 years, it would be used for a greenway or walkway, but to have control over it for future.
So it's to create a corridor, really, because we have a partial corridor with the North Carolina Railroad track line that was under consideration originally, but it's not a connective corridor at this point. It does not join Wake Forest to Winston-Salem State University.
Correct. That's only proposed.
And so this study will exclusively be directed to that, not the multi-use pathway, any other greenways, anything else will be considered. Strictly that corridor from Winston-Salem State to Wake Forest University is what this $1 million is being spent on.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown, I thought that this was being actively discussed more recently than 2014.
As far as the streetcar,
Yes, as far as the streetcar project, the north-south corridor.
the
Yeah,
Just what the Innovation Quarter did their high-level feasibility study last year, which we provided a little bit of funding.
so they did that, did that study last year, not in 2014.
2014 is when we did our large circulator.
You're right, right. 20, yes. So what, you've got two different studies. You've got the
Correct.
2014 study that came back with an east-west route and a total price tag that was, effectively deemed politically unfeasible at the time being because of the unlikelihood of federal and state matching funds. That's 2014. Now, are you telling us that that the Innovation Quarter did a study of its own last year of the north-south corridor?
Correct.
And made an internal determination that it was not economically feasible?
Yes.
yes.
All right. I don't remember ever seeing that study. Are we ever going to see that? Are they going to share it with us?
Yes, sir. That's part of the information that you'll receive later this week.
Yeah, we'll get you a copy of it, yeah. And that's where that recommendation came. I thought we'd already sent it, but the recommendation came to consider this, preliminarily securing the land and having basically the trail for a future rail, but creating the trail first.
Okay. I know there'd be a lot of interest in the trail. I don't know how much it's going to cost to, acquire that. Anyway, because I do regularly hear, when are you going to do a trail up to Wake Forest, and say, where are you going to get the money? I do think it's important to note that what the study appears to be directed toward is the potential for transit-oriented development along this corridor. And that was an element of the 2014 study of the east-west corridor to give us an idea of the kind of value we could pick up locally in terms of tax base and economic return from the development of the line. And in both cases, the focus technology that would be presumed used was the streetcar technology. Is
Correct.
that still correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we're talking about what would be the potential development impact, transit-oriented development impact, if we were in the future to run a streetcar line along that corridor?
That's exactly right.
Right.
And you have to think of this more as a sort of a marathon where a large focus of this TOD grant is the comprehensive planning that involves the land use zoning, housing opportunities, and as you can develop that, moving forward in the future, as that growth comes along, that may be the source of your funding for the streetcar, which eventually services that area. So I don't want to put the streetcar before the rail,
Okay.
but that's the intent of it. So there will be policy decisions that will be recommended for the city council to consider that come out of this that support that entire effort. So I just say that because I want the committee to understand that it's much more than just looking at putting another greenway in or another bicycle path or something like that. It really is a comprehensive planning tool for the future.
And the idea of the greenway as an interim use, perhaps even in the long term associated use, was just a use that could be made of any property acquired in the interim, as opposed to a substitute for
Holding pattern.
Right. Yes, Ms. Scipio.
Quick question about all of this east-west connecting Winston-Salem State to Wake Forest.
Yeah, that's
Do-
north-south.
Do we think that is an opportunity that currently exists? And if so, have we thought about having a special bus that runs that between there just to see how much volume potential there might be? I think the study might be good, but I think that sometimes is there a real need for that? And let's test it out in the interim. That's what I would be wondering.
And I can comment on that, but Mr. Brown, how would you respond?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, when you're talking about fixed rail transportation systems, you're not just talking about the current movement demand. You're talking primarily in value return to the community for those is primarily from where it promotes development and the value of that development to the community. Because new housing and new businesses will be proposed and built along a fixed rail transit corridor at an accelerated rate over either a non-transportation corridor or any rubber tire line. When you put a bus line down, you know that can move and probably at some point will. When you put a rail line down, it's not going anywhere, so you can count on it attracting development that values transportation that you know will always be available there to other destinations on the line. Take Charlotte, for example. When they opened their first light rail line, that wasn't a streetcar, but it was light rail commuter line. There was more than $1 billion of development built along that line around the designated stops before the line was even completed. So it was an enormous economic development magnet for the community. All of this was not necessarily new residential, new people being attracted to Charlotte, but new housing that the community had to have built anyway. And we're in a severe housing stock deficit here now that's only growing by leaps and bounds. So this would be a place where it would attract them. So that any area that is along the proposed line that is economically challenged now would stand to gain in significant economic development from this. And if we plan it well and ensure that there is workforce and affordable housing included in the mix with our local rules, then we gain at all levels. Anyway, that's a quick summary of the pitch for why it's a valuable opportunity. I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman, I've said this before, but when we consider fixed transit routes, I'd like us also to consider just slightly beyond Winston-Salem State is at least $10 million of economic development in the form of Quarry Park and Salem Lake that we've tried so hard to be inclusive to make sure we're connecting people downtown to people in the southeastern portion of the city. And we know that economic development and jobs and affordable housing tend to follow those fixed routes. So I just want to make sure that even if it's not in the first leg or hopefully it can be in the second leg, that we consider just pushing a little bit further to coincide with the economic development that we've tried to pace out along that corridor.
So noted. Yes. I'm sorry, Mr. McIntyre.
I'm looking forward to the information that comes back on this as it relates to transit-oriented development and housing and how that affects housing throughout the city. I think we're going to learn things from this study that we'll be able to use in Mr. Taylor's ward and my ward, and because very little of that is currently done now, and I think that's one of the reasons why we struggle with an effective transportation system, is that we are not dense. We are very spread out, and so if we can focus more of our development in corridors like this, then I think everybody wins. Developers win, people who need good affordable housing win, and let's face it, if people don't have to own a car, they can spend more on everything else they need to spend on in their life. So I'm looking forward to this, not just for this corridor, but citywide, what it teaches us.
I agree. I think the citywide view is really important because we have so many people living on the fringes of the city now, and that's where the density is. I have in my far east part out near Union Cross, it's growing like crazy, and there's nothing to bring those people into town other than their cars. So as we look at transportation, I think we need to look at a comprehensive system that brings people throughout the city into the city. Not just that little from Winston-Salem to Wake Forest.
Ms. Larson.
I want to be clear. This study is strictly to look at the area between Winston-Salem State and Wake Forest University, which it's not. Is it?
No, sir. There are two corridors. There's a north-south and an east-west.
Okay, so we're looking at the east-west also. Both old routes, both old trolley car routes.
Yes, sir.
Wait, Mr.
No,
Brown?
this corridor would only apply to the north-south.
This is getting very confusing here as to what we're
Yes,
actually
but some
doing.
of the recommendations are general recommendations that can be applied to anywhere throughout the city.
Yeah. Well, I'm getting mixed signals here, and it's difficult enough to comprehend. It looks like we changed the grant scope, as a result of Wake Forest study, and now we're adapting it to look at a corridor still north-south involving the old railroad line route and seeing if we can, in fact, connect those two locations. Is that not what we're doing with this grant?
Hypothetically, yes.
Yeah.
That would be the include, because of the original study had the proposed corridor being from Wake Forest to Winston-Salem State, we had to stick within those guidelines of the
Exactly.
corridor.
So I'm totally fine with that. But my colleagues are talking about, expanding it out to Quarry Lake and going everywhere else. I want to be clear about what we're accomplishing with this particular grant. And I think the other thing to remember is that it does include the fairgrounds, does include stadiums and coliseum areas, residential areas on that corridor, as I understand what that original corridor was designed to do. And so I'm in favor of a study of it, and I hope that it reveals something that we can invest in the future in that will allow us perhaps to upgrade at some point to something more than a walking path between the two corridors. But I think we need to be clear about the scope of this particular work and what we expect to come out of it.
Understood.
Thank you.
And Mr. Larson, you're absolutely correct. This study is for that corridor. However, we have done a similar east-west study. It was actually more expansive, and found a great deal of potential value in that. But the cost of that was also much elevated by the train issues and the fact that there is no existing line that could be used. In this case, one of the reasons that the corridor was originally picked for study was that there was rail in existence there that could make it a lot cheaper by adaptation. So this is not the only thing that we should be doing in any event on housing and transit development in our city. This is just a tool for the study of a project that would be potentially a part of our overall mix.
So,
Ms. Hippia.
Mr. Chairman, I would like if the staff could start investigating, finding some more money so that we can look at a comprehensive transit picture for the city.
Noted request, and Mr. Brown is making a note too, and he is the man to take that
Find
message
some
back.
money.
All right, other questions, Mr. Taylor?
Just a quick comment. Maybe perhaps Mr. Larson, it was my comments that sort of complicated it a little bit more. I just want to make it clear that I have no problem between a fixed route system going between Winston-Salem State and Wake Forest, and even being inclusive of Wake Forest Innovation Quarter. The whole city is very important to me. Y'all know my story. I'm from here, and I love it. If it looks good for the city, it looks good for James Taylor. But I got to tell you, the people of the Southeast Ward sent me down to City Hall to fight for what's right for their community. And I'd be crazy if I sat in this chair and I didn't try to advocate for moving up the street to provide that kind of economic incentive to the people who I represent. So if that was confusing, I apologize for that. But I assure you I'm going to keep doing it. And, but I think we've got a clear understanding of what this particular item is all about.
Yeah, thank you.
So, other questions or comments? And if not, is there a motion?
I move for approval.
Okay.
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded to approve the resolution. Please vote yes or no. And we have yeses. Thank you very much. That's approved.
We have a timetable?
I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, do we have a timetable?
We have a timetable on when we think this RFP might go out and what sort of schedule we might expect for the results of this study?
We are currently still working on the RFP for this, and we would hope to have it out within the next 2 months or so.
Okay, and the report by the end of the year, so?
It'll be a year-long study.
A year-long study?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Right, next year's election time.
$1 million.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's scheduled agenda. Are there any other items, announcements, or general public works queries that should be raised today? See nothing from the members of the committee. Mr. Duquesne?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned, and we will see you again as the committee in August.
Hot dog.